Some stories are so crazy that you have to start at the beginning. And if you know today's guest, Don Dixon, you know this is one of those stories, so we're going to start at the beginning. This one just happens to be, well, my mother was a stripper. All that and more today on the Marketing Madmen podcast.
They say marketing is a madman's game. So now we turn it over to the Marketing Madmen with Nick Constantino and Trip Job.
Happy Saturday. Welcome to the Marketing Madmen. Trip Job and Nick Constantino here. You know, we're winding down season 2.
I can't believe that. I cannot believe that we are. It's crazy to think, but it is coming to an end.
So it's appropriate that we, about time we do the legends of marketing.
Wax
Not us.
Wax nostalgic. Wax nostalgic.
Yeah,
That's
for the
what we're
last
gonna do.
2 years, and we're fortunate to have a true legend with us today, and I think we're gonna have a lot of fun talking. So
For sure. We got Mr. Don Dixon here, and before I try to explain what the hell he's done or what gives him the criteria to be a legend, have this conversation, I'm going to turn it over to him to let him do that so we can frame this goofy conversation that we're going to have.
Well, I'm going to try and do this as fast as I can because 50 years is a lot in time to kind of put into an encapsulation, if you will. Let me start out. My mother was a stripper. So let's start there. My dad was.
We're going to start on the poll. What a place to start. We're going to start on the poll.
Let's start there.
Back then,
marketing.
No. It was pasties. There were pasties, so we're all good. There was no pictures ever crossed the threshold of the house. So my mom was a stripper. My dad was a naval aviator, Navy fighter pilot. So go from there. 17 schools, growing up, lived in a bunch of countries. Ended up San Diego State, 5 years at the beach. Couldn't get any better than that. Absolutely.
Love it. I used to live there. I love it out there.
Tried to play golf. Didn't quite make it, but I had a good time. I ended up running golf tournaments for the first few years out of college. Okay. Then I ended up going back to New York and got a job at Dancer, Fitzgerald, and Sample Advertising. If you watch Mad Men, a.k.a. the name of the show here, you've heard of it, DFS. I worked on Hamm's Beer, Legs Pantyhose. You can blame me. I signed Bruce Jenner for Wheaties. I also signed Mark Spitz for Schick. So, those were the halcyon days, if you will. Did that for several years, and then I ended up getting a job, which I'm going to tell a little story about it in a few minutes. I ended up going to Anheuser-Busch as their first director of sports programming and entertainment.
Wow.
Which was just a career maker. I mean, you can just imagine.
But groundbreaking. Everyone's got one now, but back then, this was pushing the limit. You didn't have a sports marketing division. You didn't have sponsorship.
No, this was their first foray into that. Right. Did Anheuser-Busch, had a great time there for several years. Then I ended up going to New York and kind of opening my own company with the guys who created the egg for Legs Pantyhose. Yep. Crazy. Did that. There at the agency, and then they got sold to Saatchi & Saatchi Advertising. Yeah. So I was a partner. I ended up going in. I got named chairman of Saatchi & Saatchi Marketing Services Worldwide. Wow. So lived all over the world, did a bunch of work with a bunch of Olympics, had a great time. They lost their minds. I mean, the Saatchi brothers absolutely lost their minds. I mean, these guys were nuts. Got the business back, kept it independent, and then I sold it to Cox Enterprises. There you go. Cox Enterprises, spectacular company. You know it. They're amazing. Jim Kennedy, the leadership there is absolutely the best.
Legends in Atlanta.
Yeah. So I stayed at Cox until I hit the magic age, if you will. And I graduated from Cox. Ended up working for Mayor Reed for a few years, running integrated marketing and partnerships for the city of Atlanta. The new mayor came in. I got canned. It was over. Got canned. And then I started my own company back up again. And then I ended up working for an agency here that did marketing for the Air National Guard, the Secret Service, and the Capitol Police. Wow. Left there recently, and now back out on my own doing consulting for a number of agencies.
That is a wealth of experience right there.
And and as you were mentioning some of the names and the companies, I've only got a third of a century in the business, but one of the things I think about is that there are a lot of those stalwart names that you talked about Saatchi & Saatchi kind of being a little crazy and changing. And then there was others that didn't honestly change at all.
Right.
And kept in their own mindset. And when we get into stories, I have a BBDO story.
Know a bunch of people from there.
But then you get to like Cox where they had a long-term view, but my sense is they probably allowed things to evolve with the times.
It's interesting about Cox. Cox is never first in.
Yeah.
They're always second in, but they're the best. They're the most well-planned Absolutely.
I've heard a lot about their incubator program also, and the companies that have come up through that incubator program. And look, I think, you legacy out. Mama Cox is aging out now, and there's different people coming up, and they sold their media, a lot of the media business and the radio stations and all that stuff. Actually, just yesterday, Cox had sold the radio stations to Apollo.
Right.
Apollo just sold their Houston cluster over to Radio 1. So you're seeing in that change quickly. So the landscape of that has changed a ton. And I think they were smart to downsize to a certain capacity to focus on core competencies, because the automotive space is booming right now.
Well, I worked on Autotrader.com.
Kelly Blue Book and AutoTrader, they ran a monopoly on that space. If you're an car dealership, you have to work with AutoTrader. They've almost pulled that monopoly. And once you have that, why leave high margin for new things, especially in economic downturn? So I think they're being run particularly well.
The fascinating thing about Cox is they are egoless. I mean, if you go through the management and you look at everybody, it's all about the company. Jim Kennedy is certainly not seeking press. Taylor is not seeking press. They just don't. They let the business speak for itself. They hire really, except for me, really smart people, and they let them do their jobs.
And they're not worried about quarter to quarter.
No, no.
I mean, that's
but when they took the company back, they took cable back private. Smartest thing, absolutely smart. Because they can invest. They don't get beat up every quarter. Like what's your profit every quarter? It's amazing
for sure. Well, look, all that wealth of experience. I think this is a good time to start telling some funny stories, some goofy stories, some horror stories, and what I like to do is let's go into the story and then let's make this applicable to nowadays. What we've learned, what's changed, what Tripp and I think, because it's really, this is meant to be a learning thing. And with all that experience, what do you have for up and comers, for people who what you just told, that path? Those paths don't exist anymore. Those paths are paths that made this country great, but it's not easy to just pave your way into all those different places, especially starting with the stripper mother. That's probably the hardest criteria out of all of it. So let's get at it. Let's start with a story, and let's have a little moral.
Sounds good. I think probably the most appropriate place to start is how I got to Anheuser-Busch, because that kind of put me on the map to semi-greatness, if you will. So I was working at Dancer Fitzgerald Sample Advertising, and we'd just done some really fascinating things. I got Toyota to become the sponsor of the U.S. Olympic team. It helped forestall import restrictions in those particular days. So I had a little bit of ink, and a guy called me, a headhunter, and he said, "Hey, Anheuser-Busch is looking for somebody to run sports and entertainment." Well, in those days, it didn't get any bigger than that, So I'm talking to him, and I'm thinking to myself, who is this guy? Who's calling me? And that was the first thing I always try and do when you talk to somebody is what's your
background? You don't have LinkedIn. It's not as easy to go.
No. I'm on the phone. I'm on the phone. And it was a dial phone.
Morse code. Who is this guy? Who is this guy? Yeah.
So I found out a little bit about him. The guy, he loved Formula One. He was a Formula One fan, and he loved wine. So he said, "Well, where are we going to meet?" So I'm thinking to myself,
he had to be European. I mean, when is this? Who Formula One?
He was from St. Louis. His dad was a farmer, for God's sake. But he had, this was his passion. So I said, "Wait a minute. You know what? Let's meet in New York at a restaurant called Le Chantecler." Well, Le Chantecler was a restaurant that was the epicenter for motorsports and celebrities on 49th Street off of 6th Avenue. Former Formula One driver from the 20s and 30s owned it. And I had met the guy because we had done some stuff with Dancer with Toyota, because we sponsored the Watkins Glen Grand Prix. Okay. Well, one night after a big press event, it's about, we all leave the place, and the coat check lady had put all of the coats out. Everybody got their coats. Everybody leaves. I'm about a block down, and I went, wait a minute. Nobody tipped the hat check girl. So I go back. The door's closed. I knock on the door, and Renee Dreyfuss, the owner, opens it up. Yes, don't. And I said, we forgot to tip the hat check girl. And I give him $100. And he goes, oh, he says, my wife will be very appreciative. So every time I'd come back after that, he was like, Don, blah, 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 nice guy. So I'm going to meet this guy, the headhunter. So I go into the restaurant the morning I'm supposed to meet him, and I hand him my picture. Because on the wall is everybody who's anybody, So I said, put my picture on the wall and make sure I have a nice night. Yeah. The guy comes in, he sits at the bar. I'm right next to Tom Brokaw. Wow. So I am. So we sit down to dinner. Place is packed. It's a Friday night. We have the best table. It's waiting there for us. Nobody's being seated. Guy brings a '61 Latour to the table. I'm like, oh my God. So brings over celebrities. The president of CBS, who I'd met with that day, came in. Everything's set. It's perfect night. The guy says to me, you definitely are the guy that should be running sports.
Are you trying to get a job or marry this guy?
Back in the day,
you're popping the question here.
Well, I also did that with my wife, but that's a different story. Yeah. So he leaves. He leaves. So at the end of the day, I go back home. He gets a call. He says, "Did you get the job?" I said, "Yes, I got the job." 2 days later, I get the picture in the mail and the bill. So the real lesson is that be nice to everybody.
Sure.
Be nice to everybody. The hat check girl, the waiter. It could have been his son.
The shuttle drivers.
Exactly.
The stories. I mean, the Amazon stories.
Don't be a jerk.
Yeah.
Don't be a jerk. It's simple.
And that's applicable. I mean, I'll tell you one thing. When I lived in Vegas, I was 24 years old, and I walked into a nightclub. I got everything for free. Why in Christ's name would I get anything for free? I had no money.
Yeah.
Who was I? But because I was nice, and they know that $10 was the last $10 I have, and I would give, I got taken care of like a king in Vegas. Everything was free all the time because I was straight up honest to the people, and I tipped what I had, even though that money coming out of my pocket was more than anybody else that was tipping out of their pocket. So I agree. It is
I'm an over tipper. It's kind of what I do. Maybe because my mother was a stripper. I don't know. I mean, maybe that was
Why
kind
does
of
he have so many
genetic
dollar bills? This is so odd. Why is everything in singles? You can't pay a mortgage in singles.
But it kind of goes along with the lines that be always open. Get on, stop looking at your phone, shake hands, meet people, have a conversation. You never know where something is going to benefit you.
Well, and look, I'm in a business today where I deal with a lot of C-suite. All right, and so that part still has assistants, office assistants, and one of the keys have always been is you're not going to get the CEO or the CFO directly. You get their assistant, and you start up a conversation. You start to learn about them, and guess what? Then when you need to get the CEO, it's so much easier.
So two things. One, you're completely right, but you can't ask right away. You got to time that thing right completely.
No question.
You have to have the right time to ask for those things, right? Yeah. Always. And two, you can't be afraid to ask for favors, but you better damn well be ready to pay that favor back or in advance pay that favor. Right. It's a shame that people are not more. I tell people all the time, ask me. The worst I can say is no. Ask me. You need tickets to the Braves? You want front row? You want this? Listen, ask me. The worst thing I can say is no.
People want to help, by and large. People want to help.
Absolutely, 100% agree. We're going to come back to that in the next section, and I think we're going to have a lot more fun stories as well and lessons. So you're listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3.
Now back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3 FM.
Welcome back to the Marketing Madmen. Trip Job and Nick Constantino here with a good friend and mentor, I think, to many people, Don Dixon. And we were talking a little bit about, don't be afraid to ask, and know your ask and know how you're going to repay your ask, and maybe we'll start with that.
Yeah, and look, I think this is a similar thing with marketing, right? You got to have some strategy to how you do things, but it's also got to be that instinct to go and run and tip the coat check girl, right? You got to just know when to do the right things, when to apply the right principles, and you got to be a little strategic, right? You had this guy, you had the perfect interview set up. Had you not met that place, maybe this job wouldn't have happened. So it might be improv, which is the best kind of strategy, but there's got to be some strategy into this. And I think in your career, it's a very similar thing, right? Marketing is about human interaction. It's about communication. It's about knowing people. It's about getting stuff for free and giving stuff. I always joke, I don't need t-shirts, but you know what I always get? Thousands of t-shirts, because everywhere I go, everyone wants to give you something because you're a person of influence. So all I'm going to say is throughout your career, as you grow and you develop, as you're a marketer, as you're a business, don't be afraid to ask people for things. Be willing to give things back, and don't always be so uptight about it. Be fun, be flexible, be able to, because you never know when that will get you to the next part of your career. So, what do you got, Trip? What do you got, Don? I think, again, if I'm just giving advice out, I think that's a great way to start, because that is marketing 101.
And what you can give is not always things. Sometimes, people refer to me a little bit as a connector. Yep. So right now, one of the things, I actually just got off a call yesterday with one of my clients. We're having lunch, and we're actually going to get them back. And so we do the research and intelligence for them. And, I know them well. But I said, what are the other challenges? What else are you facing? And they need people, right? And so I said, I think I may know someone. I said, are you willing to look at an organization that can do this? And this is blue-collar trade people they need, right? I mean, the trades these days.
Yeah.
Well, it just turns out that not only did I know someone who may be a perfect fit for them, but they're a prospect I've been trying to get into. So guess what? I'm going to be calling and connecting this guy and say, look, I've got a client that I think really can use your services.
Perfect. You thought on your feet, improv, but there's strategy involved, and there's a bigger picture.
And so sometimes it's connections, it's people. It's not just things. but how can you always be thinking and asking? It started with the question, not anything that we could do, but what else? What are the other struggles you're having right now? How can we help?
You know, finding out what people's problems are probably the most important thing to do. You know, I mean, at Cox, you learn that. Discovery. It's discovery, discovery. You're sales guys.
I would say as important that you had to develop rapport first, because you got to have that trust to find the problems. Because most times people aren't just going to come out and tell you, start bitching about the problems. They're not the problems you can solve. So you have to develop rapport first.
Exactly. I've had about a 4-year relationship. I had on my own with this client, and now with my new business. And so yes, but you know, you can, after a short period of time, develop some of that if you're genuine.
Yeah. So let me jump into another, you know, sidebar here, another story here. And because the pension check shows up every month, this is a Cox related story. So I want to thank them, if you will. This is an Auto Trader scenario, and it's kind of fascinating. When I first came over to Auto Trader from corporate, Auto Trader had not hit the peaks that it was at now. It was probably about 400 million or whatever. Right now it's close to 2 billion. So you know what the growth has been absolutely, you know, meteoric. So when I went over there, they just signed a deal to sponsor some of the auto shows, some of the big auto shows. And they got the studies back. What they had done is at the auto shows is they really didn't have a core idea what they wanted. What the goal was is let's get in front of dealers, because we're probably going to start to list new cars, not just used cars. So we want to get to know dealers. And, of course, they have used cars. So it's a dealer relationship. And if people are at the auto show and they don't end up buying a new car, or they think about it, they'll look at Auto Trader. Well, what they did is the execution was horrendous. It was a car with ping pong balls in it, and you came up and you got to guess how many, and it didn't happen. I mean, nobody was going. It was voted the worst exhibit at the New York Auto Show.
Wow factor.
Hello, worst exhibit. So the prevailing mood around the company and the department was, we made a bad decision. Let's drop this. We're not going to do it. And I came back and I said, wait a minute. We don't have enough information. We really don't. So
it's the right target audience twice. You got the dealers and you got the people who love
cars.
The
people.
You got the exact audience.
We didn't have the idea.
The execution wasn't
We
there.
didn't have the idea. So what I did is I sent people out to auto shows run, you know, for 6 months. So we sent people out, and and I said, video what people do at the auto shows. Well, they're there for 4 hours, and they got a rest at one point in time. They stopped. So I'm thinking, wait a minute, let's give them some entertainment. And where are they? They're they're sitting in a corner eating a hot dog and a bad pretzel, you know, and they're getting no information.
Right.
So what I did is I created a quiz show that looked like a TV set. It was Jeopardy around cars. And we built this near the biggest concession stands in each of the auto shows. And it looked like you were live TV. We had on air. We had guys walking around floor. We had associate directors. We had quiet on the set. We hired a guy who had done some quiz shows on TV. And it was quiz show, but it was Jeopardy. It was cars and movies, cars and celebrities, cars and music. People would vie to get on. And what would they win? They won money to spend at the dealers to buy a car. Yeah. So
funny money.
There was real money. But at the end of the day, you know, so we did this. It ran for 3 years. It was voted the best.
You're ingratiating yourself with the dealers, because now all of a sudden you're driving leads. No matter how you look at it, it looks like it's a prize with tangible value.
We were getting calls from dealers. How do I get one of my customers on the TV show? We were streaming it to nobody.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it was all about the idea, because we went in, and the lesson is on the surface, don't change your mind until you really deep dive. What is the consumer behavior? Yeah. Not just the data. We've talked about this before we got on the show.
That's the intuition.
And get some creative, smart people to sit around and say, okay, what do I do with this knowledge that will engage with the consumer?
The data was right. It was the right consumer. You're just doing the wrong things. I thought personally, with the way the story was going, and with Don's past and his stripper mother, that he was going to simply say that he invented the hot chicks in small outfits at auto shows. I thought that's where this was going. I am happy it didn't, but I thought this was going to be. I was the guy that invented.
I'm doing the math. I think that's 1962.
I thought that's where we were going. So I'm glad it went that way, because that's actually, there's tangible benefit from that. And again, we're not allowed to say hot chicks in bathing suits anymore. But
no, you can't.
I think that is, again, I think you're completely right. The data was right. It was the right people. You had the dealerships. You can ingratiate with the dealers. You had the right people who were the most highest affinities towards Auto Trader, right? If you're going to go to a car show to look at cars, you're probably going to browse cars somewhere, right? I'm exactly that guy. I go to every auto show, and I'm that guy that will look through cars, used cars, new cars. I don't need to buy a new car, but if one caught my attention, I might go buy a new car. So
right, and I think that's the approach. Unfortunately, the wrong approach many people take at shows is it's all about the product and it's not about the customer.
Yeah. The other thing too, the other what do you get out of this is when we came back and said here's what it's going to cost to do this because it's an expensive proposition. Right. Kudos to Cox and management and the Auto Trader, John Kovac and Clark Wood and the guys who basically signed off on the idea was this was going to be expensive. But they knew that if we did this show in a shabby way, if we just put a desk out and had a guy with a mic, it was going to crater. You have to create presence. You have to create size. You have to create impact.
Yeah.
And if you've got a good enough idea, invest in it or don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't do something half-ass.
So one of my highlights of my career was when I was running sales and marketing for Belgard. And so the Philadelphia Flower Show, which has been running for, 50 years. Actually, I guess the original, I saw a plaque the other day. I mean, it goes back to, hundreds of years ago. But, it's a 2-week event, essentially, in downtown Philadelphia. And we got a call, it's always in February or March, we got a call in late November that the 18-year sponsor in our space had backed out. And so were we interested? And really quick, this is late November, budget's already done. So, this was a perfect opportunity for us to get in. And so we kind of worked out, tell you what, they wanted, 1 year. I said, look, it's already post-budget, so I'm willing to give you a 3-year deal if you're willing to give me right of first refusal. And I said, here's what you're asking in year 1. I can't pay you that. But I will make year 3 more than year 1 and step it up. So they knew that we've got the money, we're willing, but last minute we can't do this. So we ended up, the average was still less than the 1 year they wanted, but we gave them a 3-year contract. They're still doing it to this day. And, we got in there and the experience that first year was we did, we had our displays, we had the flower, everything that came in with our displays. But we did a couple of special events, brought the dealers in from not only Philadelphia, but from New Jersey, even Boston.
Yeah.
Because this show pulls up and down the East Coast. And just in the Philadelphia market, where we were like 5th in that market, we were 1st or 2nd most everywhere else, but we tripled our business that first year.
Yeah. I mean, the auto show, basically, in each of the auto show markets where we were at, the dealer business, because that's where the revenue is, obviously, the dealer business went up, and also site traffic went up, because we were hitchhiking on the auto show, advertising at the end of the day. Yep. We also replicated the game that we played online.
There it is.
So we replicated the game online.
There's your scale.
So we scaled. We didn't do that till the 2nd year, but we replicated the game online.
And that's what's so important, okay? So when you have sponsorship, any type of sponsorship, the event itself, what you invest in should be, let's not give it a number, but should be only a percentage of what you invest. The actification, the amplification, the scalability, if you are not having those conversations, then you are poorly investing your money in a sponsorship. Ironically, this build, one of the biggest sponsors we have is Truist Bank, and that was the conversation. And when it was SunTrust, they put a billboard up. You know why they put the billboard up on the park? Because when they almost ran out of business in the recession, everybody did. So they wanted to make sure people knew that they had made it, they were there, and they made it through. So they sponsored the stadium. You know what their plans were after that? What do you mean? You have a billboard. No one even knows what SunTrust is. What happens when people see you on TV when they don't even know what it is? What's the amplification? We are on the back part of a 10-year partnership because of that opportunity. Is how can we amplify it? How can we extend it? Because you know what that doesn't do? It doesn't tell a story at all. Right. You know what sports talk radio does? It tells a story. It amplifies. It makes it personal. It makes it hyper local. If you don't have methods built in to amplify and extend the reach and frequency of your message and drive additional engagement, you are spending a big check for almost nothing when you're going to quantify it in the back end.
And great point. And so that first year, we didn't know all the things we could do, but we learned by being there that
Good
Morning Philadelphia actually showed up on some of the, so we already set it up. Year 2, we had a Good Morning Philadelphia in our booth.
Right.
You know, and things like that.
And it doesn't have to be a year one. You're supposed to feel these things out. That's why you do long-term deals.
Yeah.
But again, what people do, they make the mistake of saying, hey, I can't afford this. I already spent much money on X. And that is the flaw. You are better to do a smaller deal with the principal property and then put more money towards amplifying it. That's why some people will buy, you know, the marks to the Atlanta Braves or the Atlanta Falcons. You're talking 250 grand just to be able to say partner of. If you don't have a plan to use that, what are you doing it for?
Right.
What are you doing it for? Are you using it to build affinities? Are you using it to go after the right people? Are you using it for hospitality and play? And hospitality shouldn't be where it ends because there's additional ways to amplify it. So it's an important point here is when you start these things, one, hopefully you're working with someone that'll allow you the flexibility to spend the money required to do things the right way. Hopefully you're working with somebody that'll allow you a partner that will let you sink costs into year 3 so you can do it in year 1. But all those things have to come together, and it has to be a strategy involved with flexible long-term plan. Otherwise you're wasting your money and your sponsors.
You know, our business now is helping companies decide, you know, whether they should be part of our business, I should say, is helping decide whether people should become a sponsor. The first thing we do is we come up with a plan, an activation plan. Here's what you're going to have to spend. Here's what you're going to get out of it. Here's what your ROI is going to be. The access to the rights, the buying you know, opportunity. That's the back end. At the end of the day, if we don't have, if the client isn't excited and energized and can see how this can impact it. The other thing too is when you build a plan is look across the board. How many different audiences can it impact? It's your sales team. It's your internal team.
For sure.
It could be the technology team.
Sure.
It's the stockholders.
Recruitment is the biggest one right now of all the deals we deal with. People are talking about, so college campuses, this has become the hot button, right? If you're going to sponsor Georgia Tech University, stop thinking about this as a poor football team and a poor basketball team. Think about this as one of the most prestigious technical institutes in the entire world with partnerships with AT&T and Ford. If you can amplify that message throughout that, then it makes more sense, right? So recruitment has become important. So I agree. There's so many different facets of it.
You got the note. You're leading into my next example. Recruitment. So
holy, this is completely an accident, by the way. I don't know how I'm setting up these segues. We didn't plan any of this.
It was onomatopoeia or whatever the hell that is. You know, at the end of the day. The agency I worked for recently, we did a lot of work for the Air National Guard doing recruiting, you know.
And that's got to be a fascinating business. Before we even start, just give a second, talk about that, because I find it fascinating that how much money is spent on this recruitment mechanism. I mean, Russia's just telling everybody, you can't leave the country, you're coming to war. Literally, they just came out today and said that you will, if you do not sign up to be conscripted, you will have your passport taken away, you will have your houses seized. They are forcing people to pretty much go to war.
We did not go that far. We decided that was not a good idea. You know, we thought about it, but it wasn't a good idea. When we got the Air National Guard account, they had the lowest awareness of any military branch. They'd not been marketing for 3 years. We had in America at the time had the lowest interest in a military career historically. Belief in national institutions is, as you can imagine, is way down. So how do we create awareness? And everybody's going, I don't want to go overseas. I don't want to get shot. You're still in the middle. This was 3 years ago. They're still in the middle of going over to Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran, whatever. And it was danger zone. So this is not a good thing. So we said, wait a minute. What do they understand about the mission? So we did a lot of focus groups. And what we found out is that they didn't understand that 90% of the mission of an Air National Guardsman is here in the United States. You know, and it's natural disasters. And if we also did a lot of psychographic research, at the end of the day, what we found was millennials are givers. They want to help their local community. You know, how do I contribute? Well, this is a great way for you to get free college tuition, get health care. I mean, big issues with health care.
Risk reward.
Risk
reward.
What you got? And, you know, and you can enhance your skills. You can pick the schools that you want to go to. Air National Guard is probably one of the most technologically oriented military services. So you're getting people who are data heads and nerd heads are joining this. And we focused on that. But the first thing we had to do is we had to create awareness. Okay, that's not data. It's what's the idea to create awareness. So what we did is we took over major transportation hubs. We took over Madison Square Garden, Penn Station, the LA airport.
High density,
and 300 ad units at each of these. National Guardsmen walking with Air National Guardsmen walking with local police. Interviews of National Guardsmen. Radio remotes. Thank you, radio. Radio remotes at each of these locations. I'm telling you, the numbers went through the roof in a very short order of time. That year when we had the account, the Air National Guard was the only military that hit all of their recruitment goals. And that ended up us getting the United States Secret Service account.
Well, and look, I think
Capitol Police account.
I think you bring up a good point that we talk about a lot. One of the things about when you stop marketing, first of all, if you've been a long-term marketer, it's going to take years for you to see the impacts of your stopping in marketing, right? But you said you were off for 3 years. So doing that huge blitz with that huge strategy was making up for what you'd have to do for 6 months or 2 years to get the buzz back going.
We couldn't nickel and dime it. We couldn't say, well, let's just go run some spots.
And that's the important thing
It was not going to happen. The other thing we did.
You didn't want to be a mile wide.
Yeah, the other thing we did, going back to radio, okay, is the Country Music Awards, the iHeart Music Awards, and what we did is a lot of celebrities had their homes saved by Air National Guardsmen during the forest fires.
In California,
and the forest fires. So we went there and we enlisted, asked the celebrities, would you put a little shout out for us on the red carpet? They're going up and saying, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the Air National Guard. The numbers were off the absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And it was sincere. It wasn't a contrived. It wasn't an ad at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So it's 360 marketing,
using
all your tools, coming up with a big idea, spending, behind it.
And executing it smartly.
Yes.
So I happened to see this week, someone threw a post out. Can't remember what the airline is. I think it was an international airline, but they did an escalator wrap.
Yep.
Right. So it showed, so-and-so fly, whatever. Well, the problem was it was on the down escalator with the nose of the plane right at the bottom of the escalator.
Should have gone the other way.
Yes.
We actually did escalators at Penn Station, too, but we did the plane going the other way.
Exactly. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like execution.
Well, what it was kind of, it's simple things. We had a visual of it was a digital board as you walked into Penn Station. And it's 12 feet high or whatever it happens to be up there, and you look up at it, and it's the back end of an F-15. And as people walked up, it was motion activated, and the burners would go on.
Cool.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And you'd hear the sound, and we got Penn Station to install sound. So when you come up, all of a sudden you'd hear this. You had to look. You had to look. So, again, idea. But
I have to
fully
imagine
executed.
that's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot to get that functioning, right? Just between MTA and individual institution owners, all the media partners, you're talking of a massive endeavor. How long did it take to plan that, execute that?
Here's this. If we were a commercial concern, it would have never happened. But we were the federal government, the Air National Guard, national defense. Need to keep our mission. You need the people to fulfill the mission.
Station, I mean, that is one of the biggest hubs in the world. If you talk about a place where there's federal presence, let's leave it at that.
Walk around, and they have military people everywhere. But during this time, the only people there were Air National Guardsmen. And the problem is the Air National Guard uniform. Looks very much like the Air Force uniform and the military and other branches of military. So we had to do something unique. And we got a dispensation for them to wear a cap that had Air National Guard on it.
Yeah.
And by their
that's
statutes,
not easy business.
It was hard to do that.
Yeah.
But we pulled off a bunch of different things to make sure people knew that's Air National Guard people that are there. So it works.
It's great. Yeah, it's a great story because, again, going back to the federal government and just these are all different mechanisms in how they operate, right? Everything story you told was a completely different entity that operates completely. Like Cox Services that operates very differently than the federal government.
So what about, so a lot of our listeners here are, maybe smaller businesses, concerns. Maybe give us a nimble, quick-hitting, obviously that was an immense type of project, but a story on something
that was more than $2. Yeah. It was expensive. I'll get real simple. Bridgestone tires wanted to sell tires. We're out in California. They got an extra shipment. What do? We went up to ski resorts and hired the guys who parked the cars with a tread depth indicator to walk around the parking lot and check the tread depth of people up there in snowy areas, and then we put a slip of paper underneath their windshield that said, "You're going to die on the way down the mountain unless you buy these."
I've done that drive before. I've driven up to Big Bear, and I had to put chains on my tires.
Exactly
so you're not joking here. You go from elevation real fast.
Yeah,
Big Bear's a great example.
It cost us $1,000 to hire these guys. We brought in a truck with the lifts and everything. So before you leave the mountain, stop and buy Bridgestone snow tires. We sold the living crap out of tires. Simple.
Great. Yeah.
And it was just real easy. The guys who run the resort are going, who are you? How did you get here? What do you do? And they're not going to kick us off at the end of the day. We grease some palms.
Right.
But, I mean, it worked. So you can have a simple idea, and it doesn't cost a lot of money.
Yeah, but you're providing a service that people need, whether they know they need it or not. Right. And ultimately, if you're driven in that
and
space,
we saved lives. I felt so good. We saved lives.
And you're letting them know they need. Letting them know they need it through some knowledge. You're letting them know they need it.
Yeah.
It's actually one of my biggest frustrations in life is driving around and looking at people's tires and seeing how bald and flat they are, like how dangerous it is. Like, just change your freaking tires, dude.
Or the other one is you see people on 400 or 285 here, and their wheels are wobbling. I'm like, just. Yeah,
I grew up in a gas station. My dad, after retired from the Navy, and I know it's like, oh my God, what people drive.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And these are easy fixes. That's the frustration.
So when we come back from the break, maybe we'll get into, we've talked about some great examples. Maybe we'll get into some classic fails and a few other stories like that might be fun. So you're listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3. We'll be right back.
Now back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3 FM.
Welcome back to the Marketing Madmen. Trip Job and Nick Constantino here with Don Dixon. And so we were just kind of teasing. We've talked about a lot of great stories and examples throughout your career. And, there's got to be some, whether they're yours or the ones you saw, some epic fails. And how do you learn from that?
I'll give you an epic fail. When we were first launching the Toyota Celica, it was a little four-banger engine, certainly not fast, and we decided we're going to make it the pace car for Formula One races. And
nothing can go wrong there.
Nothing can.
I think it might top out at 88 miles an hour when the cars are going 180.
Don't steal my lines. Don't steal my story here. So we got it. We got the Celica, and we're at Watkins Glen, and I came up with a brilliant idea at the time. It seemed such a good idea. Let's hire a Formula One driver to take the press for rides in the Celica. I mean, the Motor Trend, all the magazines, New York Times automotive section, we're going to get so much positive ink out of this. And I hire a guy, sight unseen, never talked to him, just through a friend of a friend, Jody Scheckter, a South African, who eventually went on to win the Formula One championship driving Ferrari, and, great guy. So we get to Watkins Glen. First thing I do is I miss the time his plane comes in, so I don't pick him up at the plane. He's not a happy guy, to say the least. He's got to take a cab to Watkins Glen from New York City. It cost him $100. He was not pleased. He shows up. He gets in late at his hotel. He has no dinner the next morning. First thing, we're going press riding on the Watkins Glen track. He shows up, and we pull out the Toyota Celica. It's a prototype. Which means that probably not everything works on it. The first guy we take is the editor of Motor Trend magazine. Jody jumps in. Motor Trend guy jumps in. They take off, and it starts raining. As they drive around the track, the defrosters are not hooked up. The windshield wipers are not hooked up. And he's driving around Watkins Glen, scaring the living crap out of this guy. And as he pulls up after his lap, and there's 20 press lined up there, the vice president of marketing from Toyota is there, and I'm standing there, Mr. Great Idea Don. Jody Scheckter jumps out, and not a stage voice goes, effing piece of jet. And that was a fail. An unbelievable fail.
You got me, but I have a much smaller one. But back late 90s, you remember we were launched a new product, and this actually went into the B2B stores kind of environment. So you remember at that point we started to see a lot more in the grocery stores, the floor vinyls.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So we're like, no one had ever done that in our industry, and it was like, this is a great way to get across, because printers would come in and they'd kind of go to their normal area. Yeah. So our customers loved them or whatever. The fail was about a couple months in, I'm going to say a third of our customers go, did you test these on painted concrete floors?
Ouch.
They basically pulled the paint off when you go to move them.
They
were designed for
not good
tile in grocery stores.
A good friend of mine actually has a brand new product right now. It's fascinating. It's called red wax, and if you wax your floors with it, and if any water gets on it, the floor automatically turns red at that spot, so you know to clean it up. So it cuts back on the slip and falls, which is a $4 billion liability industry.
Lawyers, those slip and fall lawyers.
Yeah, I mean, we got a meeting with a bunch of lawyers here in a couple of weeks to do that.
Well, considering that, I've had a perfect marketing career, never had a fail. Let's segue into a different conversation. So let's talk about tips for a young marketer. We had Joanne Harold on a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about how she started as Grimace at McDonald's.
She's a great lady.
And let's talk just, if you had to give some advice to a 21-year-old, 25-year-old that's just getting started. So my quick 2 cents is try everything. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. But most importantly, don't make the same stupid mistake twice. You're going to make mistakes. If you make it twice, shame on you. If you make it once, you learn from it, then that's a good opportunity. What tips would you have for someone coming up in the marketing space that wants to have a career like you did? What advice would you have for them?
I think the number one thing, at least from my perspective, is be as well-rounded as you can. Don't be I'm data guy. All I'm doing is data guy, or I am just a creative guy, or I am just a strategy guy. You need to have exposure and ideally work in each particular area. In the past, agencies, and I think some of them still do, agencies will have a training program where you spend 3 weeks here, 4 weeks here, 3 weeks here, and at least you understand the lexicon, and more importantly, you understand the business problems facing each of the particular areas of the business.
Now we want social media experts or digital marketing experts, and I agree. I was a generalist.
It's too narrow cast, and it's fine. It's okay. But what happens is I don't believe you can ever come up with the big idea. The idea is everything. Data's Data's great. You got to have data because that proves whether you should continue to work there or not.
But if you are that person, ask to get on some of the projects that are the bigger projects, so you see what's going on and you can be involved with the other parts. Of whether it's the agency or the marketing department, et cetera.
Yeah, the other thing that I find is, and I've been lucky enough that my kids listen to this one thing that I told them, both of them are marketing, is be the first there every morning and the last one out at night. You don't have to be the smartest, but just outwork everybody. Take an ownership mentality. If you don't have an ownership mentality, you will always be a worker. You will always be working for someone. Even if you work for someone, believe that own what you work on at the end of the day. Take tremendous personal pride in it. If you can't take personal pride in what you're doing, if you don't go the extra mile, I can't tell you the number of times that I've run into people that say, hey, at 6 o'clock or it's Saturday, I'm not answering the phone. Well, that doesn't work.
No,
not in marketing.
Not in marketing.
That does not work in marketing.
Right. And the other one, I had one of my early clients and mentors, told me, he said, look, ask the questions. He goes, the first 6 months, he goes, you can ask whatever you want. As long as it's not truly confidential, I'm going to tell you. He goes, 6 months to a year, I'm going to start, certain things I probably expect you to know. But he goes, after your first year, don't expect to ask those questions. We expect you to know it. So some people, I think, are very hesitant to ask questions because they think it means they don't know. We don't expect you to know.
But that's a good point, though. But ask them early. Ask them early, because if you don't know them, then you're going to be screwed when you ask a year later.
And it's more important to ask why are you doing something than what are you doing.
Yeah.
The why is everything. That's where you really learn, because you understand what's the backstory. Well, I'm doing this because of this. I'm
with
doing
intention.
This because of this. Where are you going? Well, why did you? Oh, I get it now. Okay, and file that away. If you got a crappy memory, write it down. I mean, the history of what's gone on, through the career is what basically makes you better at what you're doing today.
For sure. I have a good last one too. How about don't come to me with problems, come with solutions. And here's the easiest way in the world. And this is an old saying. Rahm Emanuel, when he was the chief of staff for Obama, he would say, people would come and they'd say, I have a private question. Oh, well, what is the problem? They go, that's not a problem. You need 2 solutions. He will pick which one he likes best.
Yeah, Cody Keenan's my godson, and he was Obama's writer, he had speech writer. And he tells a story, the same thing, Obama, don't you dare walk in unless, I got a problem and here's what I propose to do.
Here's 2 solutions. We can pick which one is the best, but do not go to people with problems. They don't need to hear your problems. Think of a well-crafted solution as to what you can do to fix the problem, and you will always succeed. You will always succeed because too many people bring too many problems. bring
aren't
solutions.
Yeah.
Bring solutions. Bring terrible solutions, because if you keep making terrible solutions, you might be the problem.
There is always something, even in a bad idea, that you can pull out, that you can use.
No question. Well, hey, Don, thanks so much. Fantastic to have you. And
Enjoyed it.
hopefully we can get you back and we'll talk some more stories. And you've spent today listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3. We'll be back next week. It's a wrap.